The first tree fell before Martha Ellison finished pouring her coffee. It was a cold October morning in 1998, the kind of Iowa morning where the fog sat low over the pasture and every sound carried farther than it should. Martha was standing at the kitchen counter in her white farmhouse outside Mill Creek when she heard a diesel engine growling behind the house. At first, she thought it was a grain truck on County Road 14. Then came the crack. It was not a sharp crack like a rifle. It was deeper, heavier. The sound of old roots tearing loose after holding the same dirt for half a century. Martha set the coffee pot down. Through the kitchen window, beyond the pump house and the frost-bent grass, a yellow bulldozer was pushing through the east edge of her apple orchard. The blade caught the first winesap tree, low on the trunk. The tree leaned, shuddered, and then tipped forward with apples still hanging from its branches. A few rolled across the mud before the steel tracks crushed them flat. Martha did not run. At 74 years old, she had learned that running rarely stopped men who had already decided not to listen. She pulled on her boots, buttoned her grey coat over her house dress, and walked out into the wet grass. At the end of the orchard stood Clayton Reeves, owner of Reeves Land and Development. He wore a tan wool coat, polished boots, and a hard hat so clean it looked like it had never spent a day near real work. Beside him stood his project manager, 2 labourers, and a surveyor holding a rolled map. The bulldozer operator paused when he saw Martha coming. One of the younger workers looked at Reeves. "Sir," he said, "she's here." Reeves did not turn around at first. "Keep clearing," he said. "We're already behind." The young worker hesitated. "Mr. Reeves, are we sure this is the right side of the line?" That made Reeves turn. His face tightened, not with worry, but irritation. The kind of irritation powerful men show when small people interrupt expensive plans. "We have a survey," Reeves said, "and we have a schedule. Those trees are worthless. Clear them." Martha heard every word. She stopped near the first fallen tree, bent down, and picked up a split wooden tag that had been nailed to the trunk for more than 30 years. Mud covered half of the writing. She wiped it with her thumb. "Arkansas Black, Henry grafted. Spring 1962. The bulldozer roared again. A second tree fell, then a third. Martha turned to Reeves. "You're on my land," she said. Reeves walked toward her slowly, as if approaching a child who did not understand business. "Mrs. Ellison," he said, "we've been over this. That strip is part of the construction access. My surveyor has the map. That strip is my orchard." Reeves gave a small laugh. "It hasn't been a real orchard in 30 years. Behind him, the bulldozer knocked down another tree. Martha looked at the broken branches, the crushed apples, the tags in the mud. Then she said quietly, "You should have asked to see the books." Reeves smiled. "The books? The harvest books?" This time Reeves laughed loud enough for his crew to hear. "Mrs. Ellison, no judge in this county is going to stop progress over an old woman's apple diary." Martha did not answer. She put the broken tag into her coat pocket. By noon, 64 trees were gone. By sundown, half the town had heard that Reeves Land and Development had finally cleared the worthless orchard standing in the way of progress. And 2 years later, when Judge Ruth Calder opened the old brown ledger from Martha's kitchen cabinet, Clayton Reeves would wish he had never said that word. Worthless. To strangers driving past on County Road 14, the Ellison orchard did not look valuable. There was no sign at the road, no parking lot, no gift shop, no wagon rides, no bright red barn painted for tourists. Just 12 acres of old apple trees behind a white farmhouse, with a creek on one side, a hay meadow on the other, and a weathered shed full of wooden crates, pruning hooks, and ladders worn smooth by decades of hands. The trees were crooked. Some leaned. Some had trunks scarred by old grafts. Several had hollow places where limbs had split in ice storms and healed over slowly, but they still bloomed every spring, and every fall they still bore fruit. Martha's husband, Henry Ellison, had called them the Rose. Not the orchard, not the business. The Rose. "Go check the north row," he would say. "Wine sap is ready in the second row. Don't pick the Arkansas Black too early. Let the frost touch it once." Henry had planted some of those trees with his father after the Second World War. Others he grafted himself in the 1950s and 1960s. He believed that an apple tree, like a person, became more valuable once it had survived a few hard seasons. The first year Martha married him, she asked why he wrote everything down. Henry had been sitting at the kitchen table with a pencil behind his ear, a cup of coffee beside him, and the ledger open in front of him. "Because land has a memory," he said. "But courts don't listen to land. They listen to paper." Martha laughed. Henry did not. "My father lost 6 acres once because he trusted a handshake and couldn't find a record when it mattered. I won't leave you with nothing but memories." At the time, Martha thought he was being too serious. But Henry wrote anyway. Every season, every row, every variety, every buyer, every check. The ledgers began in 1955. By the time Henry died in 1989, there were 4 full books tied in flour sack cloth and kept in the cabinet beside the kitchen stove. After Henry's funeral, Martha almost stopped writing in them. For 3 weeks, she did not open the ledger. Then, Benton Hollow Cider House called and asked if she was still selling the Arkansas black apples that fall. Martha stood in the kitchen with the phone pressed to her ear, looking at Henry's chair. "Yes," she said. Henry would want the rows picked. That night, she opened the ledger again. Her handwriting was smaller than Henry's, neater in some places, shackier in others, but she kept the same system: date, weather, row, variety, bushels, buyer, price, check number, notes. In 1993, when floods ruined half the county's hayground, Martha wrote, "West corner held, Grimes golden smaller but strong." In 1995, she wrote, "Benton Hollow requested more Arkansas black next year, premium cider grade." In 1997, 1 year before the bulldozer came, she wrote, "Row 3 Arkansas black, 214 bushels, best color since 1983. To Clayton Reeves, they were old trees. To Martha, they were Henry's rows. To a judge, once the evidence was laid out properly, they would become something Reeves had never expected: a documented producing asset. Clayton Reeves did not grow up in Mill Creek. He grew up in Des Moines, where land was not measured by what it had produced, but by what could be built on top of it. By 1997, Reeves had made money turning old farms into subdivisions, with names that sounded more rural than the places they replaced: Maple Crossing, Prairie View, Cedar Hollow. He understood something about city buyers moving into farm country. They wanted the feeling of rural life without the smell, debt, mud, or work that came with it. So when the Peterson farm came up for auction, 220 acres bordering the Ellison place, Reeves bought it under a company name and announced a development called Orchard Ridge Estates. The name came from Martha's orchard. That was the first insult, though few people noticed it at the time. The brochure showed apple blossoms, split-rail fences, children running through tall grass, and a clean white farmhouse in the distance. The slogan read, "Country living, rooted in tradition." But the actual orchard, the real one, the one Henry Ellison had tended for more than 50 years, stood in the way of Reeves's cheapest construction route. If Reeves routed his temporary access road around Martha's orchard, he would have to grade through low ground near the creek. That meant drainage permits, culverts, wetland review, delays, and at least $180,000 in added costs. If he cut through the east edge of Martha's orchard, his trucks could reach the building site in 2 weeks. So Reeves tried to buy the strip. The first offer came by mail, $15,000. Martha folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. The second offer came with a map, $25,000. She sent it back unsigned. The third time, Reeves came himself. It was a hot afternoon in July. Martha was sorting early windfall apples on the back porch when Reeves's black pickup came up the lane. He stepped out carrying a folder. "Mrs. Ellison," he said, "I'm trying to be neighborly." Martha looked at his boots. They were too clean for July. "You're not my neighbor yet," she said. Reeves smiled as if that amused him. He opened the folder on her porch table and turned the map toward her. "We only need this strip. It's narrow, mostly old trees. We're willing to pay more than fair value." "Fair value to whom?" "To the market." Martha looked past him toward the orchard. The third row was green and heavy with fruit. "That strip has 17 Arkansas black trees in it," she said. Reeves glanced toward the orchard. "They look like every other tree to me." "That's because you don't know how to look." His smile faded. "Mrs. Ellison, I don't want this to become unpleasant. It became unpleasant when you named your subdivision after my orchard and then asked to cut it down. For the first time, Reeves looked embarrassed. Then he looked annoyed. Sentiment doesn't make land productive. Martha picked up one apple from the table and turned it in her hand. No, she said. Harvest does. Reeves closed the folder. He left without shaking her hand. That evening, Martha wrote in the ledger, July 18th. Reeves came again. Offered $25,000 for East Strip. Refused. Arkansas black heavy. Watch boundary. It was the first time Clayton Reeves entered the harvest books. It would not be the last. The county zoning meeting was held on a Thursday night in February, in a room that smelled of wet coats, burnt coffee, and old paper. The place was packed. Some people came because they cared about the development. Most came because winter in Mill Creek was slow, and a zoning fight gave people something to discuss at the feed store the next morning. Clayton Reeves stood at the front beside a large map on an easel. His surveyor used a silver pointer to show the proposed access road. This route, Reeves said, minimizes disturbance and keeps construction traffic away from the creek. Martha sat in the second row with her purse in her lap. Samuel Price, the half-retired lawyer she had called for advice, sat beside her. At that point, Samuel was not officially representing her. He was just an old friend of Henry's, who knew land records and told Martha not to sign anything. When the board opened the floor for comments, Martha stood. "That road crosses my orchard," Reeves sighed before she finished the sentence. "With respect, Mrs. Ellison, we are not talking about a commercial operation. We are talking about aging fruit trees of limited value along a disputed boundary." A few people shifted. A man in the back whispered, "That's Henry's place." Reeves heard him. "I understand there is sentimental attachment," he said. "But county planning cannot be governed by nostalgia." Martha's face did not change. "You've never seen the books." The county clerk looked up. "What books, Mrs. Ellison?" "The harvest books." A small laugh came from the back corner. Not loud, not cruel enough for anyone to admit later, but Martha heard it. Reeves smiled. "Mrs. Ellison," he said, "with all due respect, handwritten apple notes do not change the economic reality of land use." Samuel Price leaned toward Martha. "Write that down," he whispered. So she did. In the small notebook inside her purse, Martha wrote, February 12th. Reeves said, "Handwritten apple notes do not change economic reality." Then Reeves turned back to the board. "Those trees are worthless," he said. "They're standing in the way of a project that will bring tax revenue, families, and growth to this county." For a moment, no one spoke. Martha looked around the room. She saw men who had bought apples from Henry, women who had brought their children to pick drops for pies, a county board member who had once borrowed Henry's post-hole digger. No one defended the orchard. That silence hurt more than Reeves's words. After the meeting, in the parking lot, one of the farmers touched Martha's sleeve. "Don't take it too hard," he said. "Progress comes whether we like it or not." Martha looked at him for a long moment. "Progress doesn't need to trespass," she said. Then she went home, opened the ledger, and wrote everything down. By spring, the story around town had already changed. It was no longer, "Reeves wants part of Martha's orchard." It became, "Martha is holding up the development." At the diner, men shook their heads over coffee. At the feed store, someone said Reeves had offered her good money. At church, a woman told Martha, "Maybe Henry would want you to make things easier on yourself." Martha did not answer that. Henry had never once made a decision because it was easier. The problem was that Reeves's argument sounded reasonable to people who did not know the orchard. The trees were old, the rows were uneven, the east edge looked rough from the road. There was no modern irrigation system, no commercial sign, no employees, no roadside stand. Martha sold most of the apples through relationships Henry had built over decades. Benton Hollow Cider House bought the Arkansas Black and Wine Sap. Miller's Bakery bought smaller fruit for pies. A restaurant in Cedar Rapids bought Grimes Golden for its fall menu. A few families came every year for bushels they had reserved, since their children were young. But Reeves's appraiser did not see any of that. He drove by twice, took photographs from the fence line, and prepared a report. The report described the orchard as overgrown fruit trees with low market utility. Removal of selected trees would not substantially impair the property's highest and best use. Martha read the phrase 3 times. Low market utility. That was what a man called a thing when he did not know its name, its history, or its harvest. Samuel Price read the report in his office above the pharmacy. He took off his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose and said, "He never walked the rows, did he? No. Never looked at your records? No. Never spoke to Benton Hollow? No." Samuel leaned back. "That report is going to look very different under oath." Martha looked at him. "Do you think it will come to that?" Samuel did not answer right away. Then he said, "Men like Reeves usually stop right before the courthouse if they realize the other side has proof. And if they don't realize..." Samuel looked at the report again. "Then they make a mistake big enough for everyone to see." In September, Samuel Price sent Reeves Land and Development a formal letter. It was not long. Samuel did not believe in wasting words. The letter stated that the east boundary of the Ellison property was disputed, that the stone markers should be reviewed against the 1949 plat and 1965 reset notes, and that no construction equipment should disturb the orchard until the matter was resolved. Martha read the letter twice before Samuel mailed it. "Will this stop him?" she asked. "It should," Samuel said. "Should is a soft word." Samuel smiled sadly. "It is. But in court, a warning letter becomes a hard thing." Reeves received the letter 9 days before the bulldozer came. His secretary logged it, his project manager copied it, his attorney marked it for review, and Reeves wrote one sentence in the margin, "Delay risk unacceptable." That note did not matter much on the day he wrote it. 2 years later, in court, it would matter very much. The bulldozer arrived on October 6th. It was not an accident, not a misunderstanding, not a crew drifting over an unclear line. The construction log showed that Reeves had ordered the access strip cleared that morning, before the weather turned, and before Benton Hollow's scheduled apple pickup the following week. Martha heard the machine at 6:41 a.m. She knew the time, because the kitchen clock had chimed once after 6:30, and she had looked up when the first tree cracked. By the time she reached the orchard, the first row was already down. The bulldozer moved slowly, brutally, without hate and without hesitation. That somehow made it worse. Hate at least sees what it is destroying. The machine did not. It pushed through Henry's work as if 50 years weighed nothing. The winesap tree where Henry had carved a small H into the brace post fell sideways. The Grimes golden tree that had survived the 1993 flood split at the base. The Arkansas black row went down in sections, apples spilling into the mud like marbles. One of the workers tried to pull the wooden tags off before the blade hit them. Reeves shouted, "Leave it! We don't have time!" Martha called the sheriff. Sheriff Dale Whitcomb arrived 20 minutes later. He was not a bad man. That was part of the tragedy. He had known Martha since he was a boy. Henry had once pulled his father's truck out of a ditch, but when he saw Reeves's survey and the construction papers, his face changed. "You'll need a judge." Martha looked past him at the fallen trees. "By the time I get a judge, there won't be anything left." Dale removed his hat. "I'm sorry." Reeves approached then, carrying a clipboard. "I'll still honor my offer," he said. $50,000. More than generous. Martha turned toward him. "Generous? For old trees, yes." She reached into the mud and picked up a crushed apple. "This one tree brought more people back than your whole brochure ever will." Reeves looked tired of her. "Mrs. Ellison, they were apple trees." Martha's voice stayed low. "No, they were 43 harvests." The bulldozer kept moving behind her. By noon, 64 trees were gone. 17 Arkansas black, 9 winesap, 11 Jonathan, 6 Grimes golden. The rest were mixed grafts Henry had labeled by hand. The old crate shed was flattened. The drainage channel was crushed. 2 stone boundary markers disappeared under the tracks. And that evening, while the town whispered that Martha should take the money and move on, she sat at the kitchen table and opened the ledger. Under October 6, 1998, she wrote, "Reeves bulldozed East Rows before harvest. 64 trees destroyed. Tags recovered where possible. Sheriff present. Offered $50,000 after damage. Refused." Her hand shook only once. On the word refused. 3 days after the bulldozing, Reeves's attorney sent a letter. It expressed regret for the unfortunate disagreement. It offered $50,000. It denied wrongdoing. It required Martha to release Reeves Land and Development from any future claims. Samuel Price read it aloud in his office. When he finished, Martha said, He wants to buy forgiveness cheaper than permission. Samuel looked over the paper. That is one way to put it. A week later, the offer rose to $75,000, then $110,000. Each new letter sounded more polite than the last, which told Samuel that Reeves was starting to worry. But the town did not see that. The town saw an old widow refusing money. At Miller's Bakery, someone said, $100,000 is a lot for apple trees. At the co-op counter, another man said, she ought to be practical. Martha heard about it because small towns deliver opinions faster than mail. One afternoon, she found Carl Meeker waiting by her gate. Carl farmed 80 acres down the road and had known Henry most of his life. Martha, he said, I don't want to meddle. Then don't. He looked embarrassed. I just don't want Reeves's lawyers eating up what you've got left. Martha looked toward the damaged rose. What I've got left is the truth. Carl sighed. Truth costs money. So does arrogance. Carl had no answer to that, but before he left, he looked at the broken edge of the orchard and said something Martha remembered. I heard one of Reeves's men say they couldn't wait on the widow, or they'd lose the grading window. Martha turned. Who said that? The project manager. Morning they cleared it. I was by the road. That was the first crack in Reeves's story. Not the last. Samuel Price's office sat above Brenner's pharmacy, up a staircase so narrow that clients had to turn sideways if they carried a box of documents. He had been a lawyer for 41 years. He had handled boundary disputes, farm estates, drainage fights, probate cases, and one memorable argument over a bull that had broken through 3 fences and somehow become everyone's responsibility except the owner's. He was not flashy. That was why Reeves underestimated him. Samuel still used yellow legal pads. He tied old files with string. He kept a percolator in the corner that made terrible coffee and offered it to everyone anyway. When Martha brought the ledgers in, she carried them in 2 grocery sacks. I don't know if these matter, she said. Samuel cleared a space on his desk. The first ledger opened to 1955. Henry's handwriting was square and dark. Samuel turned page after page. Harvest entries, buyer names, check numbers, weather notes, spray schedules, grafting records. Then he found carbon invoice copies tucked between pages. Then cancelled check stubs. Then letters from Benton Hollow Cider House. Then old tax worksheets showing orchard income reported year after year. Samuel stopped reading. He looked up at Martha. This is not an apple diary. That's what Reeves called it. Samuel tapped the ledger. Reeves is going to regret that. He made 3 phone calls that afternoon. 1 to Benton Hollow Cider House. 1 to Ruth Ann Keller, the retired county extension agent. 1 to Amos Bell, the old surveyor who had helped reset the Ellison markers after the 1965 flood. By sunset, Samuel had a legal pad full of names. By the end of the week, he had enough to file suit. Trespass, destruction of productive property, damage to a commercial orchard, lost future income, willful disregard of a known boundary dispute. Martha looked at the complaint before he filed it. It sounds harsh, she said. Samuel nodded. It should. They used a bulldozer. Benton Hollow Cider House sat 23 miles away, in a brick building that had once been a feed mill. Leonard Voss, the owner, met Samuel and Martha at the loading door. He was a broad-shouldered man, with grey in his beard and apple stains on his hands. When Martha stepped out of Samuel's car, Leonard removed his cap. I'm sorry about the rose, he said. Martha nodded. For a moment, she could not speak. Leonard led them inside, past stainless tanks and stacks of wooden barrels. The whole place smelled like apples, yeast, and cold stone. Samuel asked, How long have you bought from Mrs. Ellison? Leonard walked to a filing cabinet. From Martha, since Henry passed. From the Ellisons, since my father ran this place. He pulled records going back 18 years. Purchase orders, receipts, blend notes, premium pricing. One document caught Samuel's eye. Ellison Arkansas Black, Reserve Blend. Do not substitute unless necessary. Samuel looked at Leonard. Why does that matter? Leonard leaned against the cabinet. Because not all apples are the same. Reeves's people act like a bushel is a bushel. It isn't. Those trees grew slow. Dry hillside. Good acid. Good tannin. Perfect for cider after storage. Martha looked down. Henry would have liked hearing that. Leonard continued. We built part of our late-season blend around those apples. When Reeves took those rows, he didn't just knock down trees, he broke a supply line. Samuel wrote that phrase down, supply line. It sounded industrial enough for a courtroom, but it was still true to the land. Before they left, Leonard handed Martha a folder. "I copied everything! And Martha!" She turned. "If they say those trees were worthless, you tell them I was still paying for them." Amos Bell lived alone in a small house behind the grain elevator. He was 81 years old, walked with a cane, and remembered property lines better than most men remembered birthdays. When Samuel asked about the Ellison boundary, Amos did not reach for a map at first. He closed his eyes. East line runs from the walnut stump that's gone now, down to the second stone marker above the drainage cut, then straight to the creek bend. Samuel smiled. "You remember all that?" Amos opened his eyes. "I set that marker after the flood of '65. Henry Ellison argued with me for 20 minutes because he wanted it exact, not close." Martha smiled for the first time in days. "That sounds like Henry." Amos dug through a metal filing cabinet and pulled out a folded copy of the 1949 plat. Then a note from the 1965 reset. The paper smelled of dust and pipe tobacco. He spread it across the kitchen table. "There," he said, tapping the map. "Reeves's access road crossed here. If he used the new survey ignored the old marker." Samuel asked, "Can you testify to that?" Amos looked offended. "I can testify to where I put a stone with my own hands." Then he added, "Assuming I don't die before trial." He did not, and when the time came, Amos Bell would walk into court with his cane, his old map, and the kind of memory Reeves's lawyers could not bulldoze. Clayton Reeves could have settled then. He could have apologized, paid properly, moved the road, admitted he had crossed the line. Instead, he made the same mistake arrogant men make when they confuse a quiet opponent with a weak one. He doubled down. His attorneys hired an appraiser who valued the destroyed trees at less than $40,000. The report said mature fruit trees had declining productivity. It said replacement cost should be based on nursery stock. It said sentimental value should not be considered. The report did not mention Benton Hollow. It did not mention 43 years of harvest records. It did not mention premium cider pricing. It did not mention the warning letter. It did not mention that the trees were destroyed before the scheduled harvest. When Samuel read it, he laughed once. Martha looked surprised. She had never heard Samuel laugh at legal paperwork. "What's funny? He valued your orchard like a landscaping problem. Is that bad?" "For him," Samuel said. "Yes." Then Reeves made an even bigger mistake. During discovery, his company produced the construction log. Most of it was dull. Weather, crew times, equipment notes, delivery schedules. But on the page dated October 5th, the day before the bulldozer came, one line appeared in the project manager's handwriting. "Ellison boundary unresolved." Reeves says proceed. Delay risk unacceptable. Samuel read it twice. Then he called Martha. "Do you still have the small notebook from the zoning meeting?" "Yes." "Good. Bring it." "Why?" "Because Mr. Reeves has been kind enough to prove he was warned, dismissive, and impatient in his own paperwork." That night, Martha opened Henry's oldest ledger and ran her hand over his handwriting. "Paper stands up better in court," she whispered. For the first time since the trees fell, she believed Henry had been preparing her for this, long before either of them knew it would happen. The trial began in March of 2000. By then, the Bulldozed strip had become a muddy construction road, bordered by temporary fencing. The remaining orchards still bloomed that spring, but the east edge looked wounded, like a smile with teeth knocked out. The county courthouse filled before 9. Farmers came in seed caps and work jackets. The women from Miller's Bakery sat together. Leonard Voss from Benton Hollow brought 2 employees. Carl Meeker sat in the back row, staring at his hands. Even some of the men who had laughed at the zoning meeting came, though they avoided Martha's eyes. Clayton Reeves arrived with 2 attorneys and a leather briefcase. He looked confident again. Developers are used to rooms bending around them, but courtrooms are different. In a courtroom, a man can have money, confidence, and polished shoes, and still be brought low by a page of paper he forgot existed. Judge Ruth Calder took the bench at 9:03. She was 61, silver-haired, and known across 3 counties for 2 things. She did not like theatrics, and she read every document. Reeves's attorney opened first. "This case is not about whether Mrs. Ellison loved her trees. Surely she did. This case is about value. Reeves Land and Development regrets that a disagreement occurred. But regret does not turn aging apple trees into a multi-million-dollar asset. He sat down. Samuel Price stood slowly. His suit was old. His tie was plain. He held no dramatic photographs, only a legal pad. This case, he said, is about a man who looked at a working orchard and saw an obstacle. It is about a company that was warned not to cross a boundary and crossed it anyway. And it is about 43 years of records proving that what Mr. Reeves called worthless was producing income until the morning his bulldozer pushed it into the mud. He turned slightly toward the judge. The evidence will show that these were not sentimental shade trees. They were mature, productive, documented fruit trees with established buyers and measurable future income. Then he sat. Martha looked straight ahead. Reeves leaned toward his attorney and whispered something. His attorney did not smile. Reeves's appraiser took the stand on the second day. His name was Douglas Trent. He wore a navy suit and spoke in a smooth voice that made uncertainty sound professional. He testified that the trees were aged, irregular, and of limited commercial value. He said replacement value should be based on nursery trees. He said the orchard's highest and best use was residential development. Reeves relaxed as he spoke. Then Samuel stood for cross-examination. Mr. Trent, when did you inspect the destroyed trees? Trent adjusted his glasses. After removal. So you did not see them standing? No. You did not see the fruit on them? No. You did not observe their condition before bulldozing? No. Samuel nodded, as if each answer was a nail going into clean wood. Did you review the Ellison harvest ledgers? No. Did you ask whether harvest records existed? No. Did you contact Benton Hollow Cider House? No. Did you review purchase records from buyers? No. Did you examine Mrs. Ellison's tax filings showing orchard income? No. Did you review the warning letter sent to Reeves Land and Development before the bulldozing? Reeves's attorney stood. Objection. Outside the scope of valuation. Judge Calder looked at Samuel. Mr. Price, Your Honor, the witness gave an opinion on value. I am testing what information he considered and what he ignored. Overruled. Samuel turned back. Mr. Trent, did you review the warning letter? Trent's mouth tightened. No. Samuel picked up the appraisal report. So when you called these trees low value, you had not seen them standing, had not reviewed their harvest history, had not spoken with their buyer, had not checked reported income, and had not examined records showing whether the destruction was avoidable. Is that correct? Trent looked toward Reeves's attorney. Then he said, That is technically correct. Samuel closed the report. No further questions. A murmur passed through the courtroom. Judge Calder looked up. The room went silent. Reeves was no longer relaxed. Leonard Voss testified after lunch. He did not look like Reeves's experts. He wore a clean shirt, but his hands were stained near the nails, and he spoke like a man who had spent more time working than explaining work. Samuel asked, How long has Benton Hollow Cider House purchased apples from the Ellison orchard? My father bought from Henry. I've bought from Martha since I took over. 18 years under my name. Longer under the business. Were the apples ordinary commodity apples? No. Reeves's attorney objected. Judge Calder allowed Leonard to explain. Leonard leaned forward. An apple is not just an apple when you make cider. Sweetness matters. Acid matters. Tannin matters. Storage matters. Those Arkansas black trees on the Ellison place gave us a late-season apple we used in our reserve blend. Samuel handed him a document. Is this your purchase record for 1997? Yes. What does it show? Leonard read aloud. Arkansas black, premium cider grade, 214 bushels, Ellison orchard. Samuel asked, Were those apples scheduled for pickup in October 1998? Yes. What happened? Leonard looked at Martha. The trees were bulldozed before we could pick them. And could you replace that fruit easily?
No. We bought elsewhere, but it was not the same, and the price was higher.
Reeves's attorney stood for cross. Mr. Voss, you are fond of Mrs. Ellison, correct? Leonard looked at him.
I respect her.
That was not my question.
All right. Yes.
I'm fond of her, so your testimony may be influenced by personal feeling. Leonard leaned back. You can be fond of someone and still keep receipts. A few people in the back almost laughed. Judge Calder glanced up, and silence returned. Leonard pointed to the document. Those numbers are not fondness. They're what I paid. For the first time, Martha saw Reeves look down at the table. On the third day, Amos Bell entered the courtroom with his cane in one hand and a folder in the other. He moved slowly, but the room watched him with the kind of respect reserved for men who had outlived both trends and fools. Samuel guided him through the old plats, the 1965 reset, and the location of the stone markers. Then Reeves's attorney rose. "Mr. Bell, you are 81 years old? Last I checked. And you expect this court to rely on your memory of a boundary from 35 years ago?" Amos looked at Judge Calder, then back at the attorney. "No." The attorney smiled slightly. "You don't?" "No. I expect the court to rely on the 1949 plat, the 1965 reset notes, and the stone marker I put in the ground, with Henry Ellison watching me like a hawk." The attorney's smile disappeared. Amos tapped the map. "That stone was here. Reeves's road crossed here. Unless that stone grew legs and walked uphill, your client crossed the line." This time, the courtroom did laugh. Just a little. Judge Calder let it last half a second before she said, "Order." But even she looked down at her notes to hide the faintest smile. Samuel asked one final question. "Mr. Bell, did Henry Ellison care about accurate boundaries?" Amos snorted. "Henry cared about boundaries the way preachers care about sin." Martha looked down at her hands. She could almost hear Henry saying, "Close enough is how a man loses land." The project manager's name was Ellis Grant. He had been the man standing beside Reeves on the morning the bulldozer came. When he took the stand, he looked like someone who had not slept well. Samuel began gently. "Mr. Grant, did you know there was a dispute about the Ellison boundary before October 6? Grant swallowed. "Yes." "Did Reeves Land and Development receive a warning letter?" "Yes." "Did you discuss that letter with Mr. Reeves?" Grant hesitated. Reeves stared at him from the defense table. Judge Calder said, "Answer the question." "Yes," Grant said. "What was Mr. Reeves's instruction?" Reeves's attorney stood. "Objection." Judge Calder did not wait long. "Overruled." Grant looked at the floor. "He said we couldn't lose the grading window." Samuel held up the construction log. "Is this your handwriting?" "Yes." "Please read the note dated October 5. Grant's voice was quiet. "Ellison boundary unresolved. Reeves says proceed. Delay risk unacceptable." The room went still. Samuel let the silence sit. Then he asked, "Did Mrs. Ellison give permission to clear those trees?" "No." "Did anyone from your company ask to review her harvest records before calling the orchard low value?" "No." "Did anyone wait for the boundary markers to be reviewed?" "No." "Why not?" Grant looked at Reeves again. This time Reeves looked away. "Because Mr. Reeves said the delay would cost too much." Samuel nodded. No further questions. That was the moment the case stopped being only about value. It became about choice. Reeves had not destroyed the orchard because he knew nothing. He destroyed it because he knew enough to wait, and chose not to. On the fourth morning, Samuel called Martha Ellison to the stand. The courtroom seemed to soften when she walked forward. Not because she looked weak, because by then, everyone understood she had been stronger than most of them. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Samuel asked her about Henry, about the orchard, about the ledgers, about the way the records were kept. Martha answered simply. She did not make speeches. She did not cry. Then Samuel asked, "Mrs. Ellison, did you bring the harvest ledger for the years immediately before the bulldozing?" "Yes." "Where was it kept?" "In my kitchen cabinet. Same place Henry kept it." "Was it updated during regular harvest operations?" "Yes." "Did you use it to track buyers, yields, and income?" "Yes." "Did Henry?" "For 34 years before me." Samuel nodded. "Your Honor, we offer the Ellison Harvest Ledger, along with supporting invoices, buyer records, and tax documents, as business records of the orchard." Reeves's attorney shot to his feet. "Objection. This is a handwritten notebook. It is not formal accounting. It is personal, sentimental, and unreliable." Martha's eyes lowered for the first time. Samuel turned toward the judge. "Your Honor, the defense appraiser dismissed the orchard without reviewing the very records that show its production. These ledgers were kept consistently for more than 4 decades, supported by independent buyer receipts and tax filings. The fact that they are handwritten does not make them sentimental. It makes them old. Judge Calder held out her hand. I will examine the ledger. Martha opened the cloth bag and removed the brown book. The cover was worn soft at the edges. The spine had been repaired with tape. A faint apple stain marked the bottom corner. The bailiff carried it to the bench. Judge Calder opened it carefully. For nearly a minute, no one spoke. The courtroom heard only the turning of pages. Then Judge Calder read aloud. October 12, 1997, Row 3, Arkansas Black, 214 bushels, sold to Benton Hollow Cider House, premium cider grade, check number 1186. She turned the page. October 18, 1997, Wine Sap, 187 bushels, Miller's Bakery and Benton Hollow split delivery. Another page, Spring 1962, grafted 17 Arkansas Black on North Row, late bearing, high value, do not cut. Martha closed her eyes. That was Henry's handwriting. Judge Calder continued reading silently. Then she looked at Reeves's appraiser, who was seated behind the defense table. Mr. Trent, she said, you valued the destroyed trees without reviewing this ledger. Trent stood halfway, unsure whether to answer from his seat. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Calder looked at Reeves's attorney. And your client called the orchard worthless without asking for production records. The attorney said nothing. Judge Calder looked down at the book again. I will admit the ledger, subject to the supporting foundation already provided, and to be completed through tax and buyer records. Her gavel touched the bench. Not hard, but everyone heard it. Martha did not smile. Samuel Price did. Clayton Reeves turned pale, because the old Apple diary, the one he had laughed at, had just become evidence. Once the ledger was admitted, Samuel did not rush. He let the numbers do what Martha had been too polite to do. He showed the court the final 5 years before the bulldozing. 1993, flood year, reduced yield, west corner survived. 1994, recovery year. 1995, Arkansas Black premium pricing begins. 1996, increased order from Benton Hollow. 1997, strongest East Row yield in 14 years. Then Samuel showed the average production from the destroyed trees. 64 mature trees, documented varieties, documented buyers, documented pricing, documented replacement timeline. Ruth Ann Keller returned to explain that replacing a mature producing apple tree was not as simple as buying a sapling. A new tree may cost $30, she said, but it cannot produce 40 years of established yield. It cannot replace a known buyer relationship. It cannot recreate a mature grafted variety adapted to that soil. Samuel asked, how long before replacement trees could approach similar production? 12 to 15 years, if well managed. Some varieties longer. Then came the tax accountant, who verified that orchard income appeared on Martha's returns year after year. Then Leonard Voss verified that Benton Hollow paid premium prices and lost access to fruit because of the destruction. Then Samuel put the numbers together. Value of mature trees. Lost 198 harvest. Lost future income. Restoration of drainage. Replacement and grafting costs. Damage to the orchard system. Legal fees. And finally, punitive damages, because Reeves had been warned. Reeves's lawyer tried to object to the scale. Your Honor, the plaintiff is attempting to turn a few rows of trees into a windfall. Samuel turned slowly. No, the defendant turned them into a loss. We are only measuring it. That line made its way through Mill Creek before supper. By the end of the week, even people who had once said Martha should settle were saying something different. Maybe Henry's books really did matter. Clayton Reeves did not want to testify. Everyone could see it. But after the warning letter, the construction log, and Grant's testimony, his attorneys had little choice. They needed Reeves to look reasonable. He took the stand in a dark suit and spoke carefully. He said he relied on professionals. He said he believed the survey was accurate. He said he regretted the distress caused to Mrs. Ellison. He said he never intended to harm anyone. Samuel waited. Then he stood with Martha's small notebook in his hand. Mr. Reeves, do you recall the February zoning meeting? Yes. Do you recall Mrs. Ellison saying you had never seen the books? I recall something like that. Do you recall calling the trees worthless? Reeves shifted. I may have said they had limited value. Samuel opened the notebook. Mrs. Ellison wrote down your words that night. Those trees are worthless. They're standing in the way. Did you say that? Reeves's jaw tightened. I don't remember the exact wording. Samuel picked up the transcript from the county meeting. Fortunately, the county recorded the meeting. Reeves's attorney looked down. Samuel read the line. Those trees are worthless. They're standing in the way of a project that will bring tax revenue, families, and growth to this county. He looked up. Did you say that? Reeves exhaled. Yes. Before reviewing harvest records? Yes. Before speaking to Benton Hollow? Yes. Before inspecting the orchard with any fruit production expert? Yes. Before the old boundary markers were reviewed? Reeves hesitated. Yes. Samuel took one step closer. And after receiving a written warning not to disturb the disputed boundary, you instructed your crew to proceed because delay risk was unacceptable. Reeves looked toward the judge. I made a business decision. Samuel nodded. A business decision. He let the words sit. Then he asked, did your business decision include the possibility that Mrs. Ellison was too old, too alone, or too poor to stop you? Reeves's attorney stood fast. Objection. Judge Calder looked at Samuel. Sustained. Rephrase. Samuel nodded. Mr. Reeves, did you believe Mrs. Ellison would be able to mount a serious legal challenge? The courtroom held its breath. Reeves's attorney began to stand again, then stopped. Reeves looked at Martha. For the first time since the bulldozing, he saw not an old woman, not an obstacle, not a delay. He saw the ledger on Samuel's table. No, Reeves said quietly. Samuel did not ask another question. He did not need to. Judge Ruth Calder issued her decision on a Friday afternoon in late April. Rain tapped against the courthouse windows. The room was full again. Martha sat with Samuel at the plaintiff's table. The ledger lay closed in front of her, wrapped once more in the flour sack cloth. Reeves sat across the aisle, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the bench. Judge Calder spoke for 42 minutes. She reviewed the boundary evidence, the warning letter, the construction log, the testimony of Ellis Grant, the appraiser's failure to review production records, the cider house purchases, the tax filings, the extension agent's replacement timeline, the ledger. Then she looked over the courtroom. This court will not value the Ellison orchard by how it appeared from a truck window, she said. It will value it by what competent evidence proves it produced. No one moved. Judge Calder continued. The destroyed trees were not ornamental remnants. They were part of a documented, mature, income-producing orchard. The defendant was placed on notice of a boundary dispute and proceeded despite that notice. The resulting harm was not merely accidental damage to vegetation. It was the destruction of productive property. Martha looked down. Samuel closed his eyes briefly. The judge read the award. Compensation for destroyed mature trees. Lost 1998 harvest. Projected lost income during replacement years. Restoration of soil, drainage, fencing, and orchard infrastructure. Attorney fees. Punitive damages for willful disregard of a known boundary dispute. Total judgment, $2.8 million. The courtroom stayed silent, not because people were confused, because everyone understood exactly what had happened. Clayton Reeves had tried to save $180,000 by crossing an old widow's orchard. He had called her trees worthless. He had laughed at her books. And now the books had cost him millions. Martha did not cheer. She did not turn to look at the people who had doubted her. She put one hand on the ledger and whispered, so softly only Samuel heard it. Henry. They finally read it. The judgment did not bring the trees back. That was the part outsiders missed when they heard the number. $2.8 million sounded like victory, but no amount of money could make a 40-year-old Arkansas black tree grow overnight. No check could restore the exact shade where Henry had sharpened his grafting knife. No court order could put fallen apples back on the branch. That summer, Martha walked the damaged edge of the orchard every evening. The construction road had been moved. Reeves Land and Development had been forced to restore the boundary, rebuild the drainage channel, and remove the temporary access cut. But the missing rows still looked empty. Ruth Ann Keller helped Martha graft new stock from the surviving trees. Leonard Voss from Benton Hollow sent 2 workers to help plant saplings. Even Carl Meeker came with his tractor and did not say much. He only worked. At noon, Martha brought him lemonade. He looked at the new row of young trees and said, I should have spoken up at that meeting. Martha handed him the glass. Yes, she said. Carl nodded. I'm sorry. Martha looked toward the surviving orchard. Then help me keep them straight. So he did. By fall, Benton Hollow released a limited cider made from the remaining Ellison apples. They called it Ellison Ledger Reserve. The label showed an old apple tree and a brown book. Underneath were 2 words, never worthless. Martha kept one bottle on the kitchen shelf beside Henry's picture. She never opened it. Clayton Reeves did not disappear. Men like him rarely do. But he changed after the verdict. Investors pulled back. The project slowed. Reeves Land and Development sold its interest in Orchard Ridge Estates to another company 18 months later. The subdivision was eventually built, but the access road was moved. The brochure was redesigned, and the apple blossom logo quietly disappeared. Still, people in Mill Creek remembered. Every time a new family moved into Orchard Ridge and asked why the road curved strangely around the old Ellison place, someone told them. That curve cost nearly $3 million, and then they told the rest. About the widow, about the bulldozer, about the trees, about the ledger. Years later, children walking to the creek would pass the edge of Martha's orchard and see a wooden sign near the new saplings. It read, "These trees were planted by hands that kept records." Below it, in smaller letters, Henry Ellison, 1919 to 1989, Martha Ellison, keeper of the rose. Martha lived long enough to see the first fruit from the replanted Arkansas black trees. The apples were small that year, too small for cider, too few to sell. But Martha picked one, polished it on her sleeve, and set it on the kitchen table beside the ledger. Then she opened to a new page and wrote, "First fruit from replanted East Row. Small, dark, good color." Henry would have waited one more frost. Long after the trial, people in Mill Creek still argued about land. They argued about development, about taxes, about whether farms could survive, about whether old ways still mattered in a county changing faster than anyone expected. But whenever someone called an old machine junk, or an old barn useless, or an old farmer stubborn for keeping records no computer had asked for, someone at the feed store would say, "Remember Martha Ellison's ledger," and the room would quiet down. Because that story had become more than a lawsuit. It became a warning. Do not mistake quiet for weak. Do not mistake old for worthless. Do not mistake something unpolished for something unproductive. Clayton Reeves saw crooked trees. His appraiser saw low market utility. His bulldozer saw obstacles. But Henry and Martha Ellison had seen harvests. 43 of them, written in pencil, backed by checks, remembered by buyers, verified by tax returns, and strong enough to stand in court when the trees themselves no longer could. They called her orchard worthless because they only saw bark, age, and inconvenience. But when Judge Calder opened the old brown ledger, she saw apples, weather, buyers, labor, soil, grafts, patience, and a family's life, written line by line. The orchard had never been worthless. It had only been underestimated. And sometimes, that is the most expensive mistake a proud man can make.